All right, good afternoon. My name is Riley Temple, from the African American Episcopal Historical Collection, the Bishop Payne Library at the Virginia Theological Seminary. And with me this afternoon is the Reverend Paul Roberts Abernathy, who is an Episcopal priest, now located in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and who in his retirement from the priesthood, as he calls it, is operating and owns and operates with his wife Pontiola, an inn. And he's just shown me some of the pictures, which I hope we will be able to explore even further during the course of the conversation this afternoon. Now, Paul, the purpose of this archive and why we're together today is that we have, over the last 20 years at the Virginia Theological Seminary, along with the Historical Society of the Episcopal Church, chronicled the history of Black Episcopalians. Now, don't laugh, because most people say, what, all three of you? I said, maybe, but we punch above our weight, thank you very much. In any event, and in my old age, I practiced law for 40 years in telecommunications in Washington. And I decided at the age of 60 or so, more than that, to go study at the seminary, at Virginia Theological Seminary. I just wanted to take some courses. And I did it leisurely, and I had a wonderful time. And so I've been involved in the life of the seminary somehow or another ever since. And they called me almost 2 years, a little bit more than 2 years ago now, to what they call expand the collection of the archive. And so I decided at that time that I would seek out people whose oral histories have not been included, but with whom I had some access, and who should be included. And I also decided, of course, that I would try to take the oral histories of the Black bishops, but the list keeps getting longer, about which I'm very pleased. And so should everybody be pleased. And also, but what has also happened that you might find of interest is that the stories of parishes, predominantly white parishes usually, and their race histories have been coming in across the transom. More and more white parishes are engaging in an examination of its racial past. And that has been a joy and a delight, and the stories can be poignant, as you very well know, but very often they are very strong and full of energy and enlightenment. So, unless you have any further questions right now, I would like to proceed with your story.
Oh, well, please.
Okay.
Where should I begin?
Why don't you let me ask the question?
Oh, okay. Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like a plan. But what I will say is that I guess I have figured out that you were born in St. Louis.
Yes.
What year was that?
1952.
1952. I am older. And how was that when you were growing up? What was your family like? What did your parents do? Did you have siblings? And were you churched?
Yes, from the very beginning. My mother, Clara Lolita Roberts, and then married Abernathy, married William John Abernathy. I digress almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Truth to tell, looking at my family history, which was not quite exposed until my father's death, truth to tell, I should have been a Silva because my father's father was from Cuba.
Yeah, I saw that. Mm-hmm.
Pedro Silva. He
Mm.
changed his name when he arrived in the United States to
Mm-hmm.
DeLacy. I think, from what I can understand, he thought that was more American. He married Edith Abernathy. And then when, over time, Pedro and Edith died, Edith's father, Herman Abernathy, took in my father and his sister, Benita,
Mm-hmm.
and their names were then changed to Abernathy because he decreed that if you live in my house,
Mm-hmm.
you have my name.
And what can you give me a time frame for this?
My father, at the time his name was changed from DeLacy to Abernathy, was 12 years of age. So my father was born in 1911, so this would have been 23.
Like my dad, 1911.
Because I have the prayer book
Yeah.
that my father had when he was an acolyte, and his name was William DeLacy, and it was then changed to Abernathy.
And explain to me why you said that this has not come to light until after your father's death.
Because my father was a very dark-skinned man
Mm-hmm.
with straight black hair.
Mm-hmm.
He was not accepted in either black or white cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he sought, just like his father sought, to
Mm-hmm.
assimilate
Mm-hmm.
to the best he could.
Yes.
And he buried that history. It was only when he died that when my wife and I were going through his effects did we come across photographs of his father and his father's brother and his father's sister, all in Cuba. Um, and have no way to trace or track any of them. We even found a deed to a tract of land in Cuba,
Mm-hmm.
and so there was some dreaming that we would go
Mm-hmm.
and claim it. Of course, that that
Yeah,
would never
well,
happen. Yeah, that
yeah.
would never happen.
Castro
Um,
took care of that.
right, oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, he did. Um, so when my mother and father wed, and my mother was very fair,
Yeah.
and as a matter of fact, she often, by many, was considered to be white.
Yeah.
And certainly her mother, my maternal grandmother, was considered to be white.
And
Another,
where was she born and where did she grow up?
now, my mother was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in
Wow.
1915. And
Oh.
one of the things that my family on my mother's side never talked about was the race riots in 1921
Of
because they
which
were,
they had memories.
yes, well, they were there.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, who in her generation was one of the on the street civil rights marchers going way back with the NAACP, never talked about it ever.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I had no idea we would have this kind of conversation. This is wonderful. When did they begin to speak of it?
I don't know because my brother and I had no memory of any conversation ever about any of this. And then when we learned, for example, of the slaughter in Tulsa, we put two and two together and said, well, wait a minute. Well, they were there.
Did you ever meet John Hope Franklin by any chance?
Meet who?
John Hope Franklin,
No, no.
because he was there.
Yeah, yes. Well, certainly know of John Hope Franklin, of
Yeah,
course,
and
but
his
no.
father was a lawyer there, and
Mhm.
and he talks about it, of course, and has written about it. Um, you spoke of your brother. You had a brother as a sibling. Any other siblings?
No, Wayne was a year and a half older.
Okay.
He was born December of 1950.
Mm-hmm.
He died March of 1996.
Wow, I'm
And
sorry.
he died of HIV AIDS.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, I'm so sorry.
Yes, I often lament, Riley, that those who have met me after his death did not have the privilege and pleasure of knowing him, because Wayne was and remains, for me, a far better person, a Christian man than I ever could aspire to be.
Where did he live?
In St. Louis.
He stayed in St. Louis.
Yes, he did.
I see. I see. Now, can we go back to your father for a second?
Oh, yes,
Family.
please.
What was your reaction? How would you describe your reaction upon learning of this hidden history?
Well, one of the jokes I tell myself is had I known that, I probably would have taken Spanish in high school and not French.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
And frankly, for me, it's less a joke than a bit of sadness. I wish I had known. I
Yeah.
wish I had known more. I wish he had talked more about that.
And why do you say that?
Because it is a piece of my history.
Yeah.
It's a piece of my self-knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, for years and years and years, there are parts of me I had no access to because I didn't know they existed.
And knowing that your father had this secret that he carried with him to his grave, what's your feeling about the nature of his own life and witness here on earth?
Well,
do you know what I'm asking you?
I think so.
How did he feel about carrying these secrets?
Well, a number of other factors I'm going to include to round out the story to the extent that I know it. Okay. One of them is my father and I had a very difficult relationship. That's just one. Let me just name that and put that aside. Okay. Because that had as much to do with me as it did with him. Yeah. My father had a brilliant mathematical mind. One of the other things we found, I mean, he was in military intelligence in World War II. Wow. He aspired to be a mathematician. That's what he wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And my mother told me years later that when he, after the end of World War II, and he left the military, there were two jobs that he could take. One was a school teacher, and he didn't have the temperament for it. My mother was a school teacher. Mm-hmm. The other was a postal clerk. Mm-hmm. So for 40 years, my father was an embittered postal clerk worker. And we found one of the other things we found after his death was his military. He had this cache of military literature that he had from World War II. And scribbled in page after page were all these mathematical calculations that he did, in part because of his work in the military, but in part also to entertain himself.
Sure. And when you talk about military literature, what are you talking about?
Everything from the prayer book for the military to military decorum to military dress to he had several volumes of and we use them. Actually, one of our rooms here at the inn, we call it the Westmoreland Bridal Suite, because the last Cleveland family heir who lived here, his best friend was General William Westmoreland.
Really? Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, I have some stories for you. Did you ever meet William Westmoreland?
No, I did not. I did not meet William Westmoreland. Oh my wife, she's overhearing the conversation, so she went to get the books.
Oh, how wonderful. Now listen. So who were the Episcopalians? On your father's side or your mother's side?
So this is one book.
Now wait a minute, hold on. What's NCCS?
The NCSS prayer book for servicemen and service women, distributed by the National Catholic Community Service.
I see. I see.
Army Songbook, Army Life, and Basic Field Manual, Soldier's Handbook. Oh my goodness! Yes.
Wait. What was in the field manual?
What was in the field manual?
Yeah. What do we mean by a field manual? And the reason I say that is because your old bishop and my current bishop, Mary Ann Buddy,
Yes.
describes the
Well,
Bible.
now she remains my bishop now because canonically I'm there. I'm
All
resident
right.
there.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. I stand corrected. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, but she says she could sometimes refers to as the Bible as a field guide.
Uh-huh. Well, this has general information, responsibilities of group life, relationship with non-commissioned officers,
Uh-oh.
relations with civilians.
Oh.
So it's the guide about how you're supposed to behave.
Oh.
Organization, clothing, allowances, care for clothing, wearing the uniform, etc., etc.
Did they have separate literature for whites and blacks?
I believe they did, although this is a general guide for everyone.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when were you baptized in the Episcopal, you and your brother, were you baptized in the Episcopal Church?
We absolutely were. My mother was Baptist. My father, before he became an Episcopalian, was
Mhm.
Methodist,
Okay.
and they settled
In
on the
Cuba.
Episcopal. Huh?
In Cuba.
Oh, no, 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 no. This is in the United States. My father was born in Chicago.
Okay.
Okay, my father
Okay.
and his sister were
Okay.
born in Chicago.
So
Okay.
he did not immigrate.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
His father did.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
so they settled on the Episcopal Church. So Wayne and I were baptized at All Saints Episcopal Church, St. Louis, Missouri.
Mhm.
At that time, the largest African American Episcopal church west of the Mississippi.
Wow. What do we mean by
And as a matter of fact, the rector in my time growing up in that church was Joseph Nicholson, who at one time was on the faculty of Bishop Payne Divinity School. And I also think that when Father Nicholson was there, he was one of the first, perhaps the only, but surely one of the first faculty members who had an earned PhD.
now? You know what this is. You know what I'm going to do the moment I get back to the archive, because I'm sitting here at my home. But when I
Yes.
get back to the archive, we have all the Bishop Payne Divinity School records.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I have a photograph of your rector.
Oh, yes. And
I am,
yeah,
yeah.
he was rector of All Saints for 18 years. And so he was the one who served to baptize me, presented
Okay.
me for confirmation.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness gracious. He was something. He
No,
was
but,
somebody.
no, okay, but I'm going to get to the second. When you say
Okay.
large Episcopal church, give me an estimate of how many communicants you're talking about.
Oh, at the time Wayne and I were growing up at All Saints, I would say there probably had to be 600, 700 members of the parish.
You know, I'm reminded often as I look at old parish histories, um, of our churches in the 50s and 60s, but mostly in the 50s, that were vibrant, full, alive, great institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And now almost all of them are shells of their former selves, with the exception, of course, of the mega churches that have come around.
Yes, All Saints Episcopal merged some years ago with Ascension Episcopal out in the county of
Yeah,
St. Louis,
yeah.
and that physical plant is where the combined congregations serve. The old All Saints is gone.
What happened to it?
Well, I think the building still stands. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly who is there, what is there, if anything.
Was it high church?
It was no, it was Broad Church because Father Nicholson came to us from CME, Colored Methodist Episcopal Church,
Okay.
and so it was Broad Church. His successor, William James Walker, was a high churchman.
Okay. And he brought the smells and bells.
He brought the smells and bells and redesigned the worship space.
Oh,
Yeah, brought the organ from the loft to the main floor, freestanding altar, etc., etc.
oh, for heaven's sakes. Y'all were carrying on.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Indeed, we were.
Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I did. I did. Again, Father Nicholson was, he was and remains in memory a linchpin in my life, and certainly for my family's life. Father Walker came in, and he was the priest through whom, under whom I received a call and went to seminary. However, the relationship with him wasn't, became fragmented and fractured.
Well, we'll get back to that, but tell me about Nicholson and how, when you say that it was a linchpin, but what do you mean by that?
Oh, he, okay, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 5 or 6 years of age,
Mm-hmm.
I was thrown out of Sunday school.
For the
And
first time.
huh?
For the first time. I'm sorry.
Mrs. Burrell Stewart, not only a member of the parish, but a dear friend, a fellow school teacher, and a dear friend of my mother,
Mm-hmm.
was teaching about the Genesis story. And I asked, why weren't there dinosaurs?
Oh,
And
God.
she told me to be quiet. I kept asking, why aren't there dinosaurs? So she threw me, she threw me out of Sunday school and sent me to the rector's office. This was in between our morning
Mm-hmm.
services.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking in to Father Nicholson's office, and he had this huge desk and this huge chair and books all over the place. Um, and I sat in this seat, and I prayed the seat would swallow me. And so he just looked at me and had his arms across his chest and his hands folded. And I can remember him asking me, he says, "And why are you here?" I mean, he knew why I was here. He said, "So why are you here?" And I told him, and he said to me, "That's a good question. And what I want you to do, Paul, is do some study and come back to me and tell me what you find."
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, yeah. And so he was he was a linchpin, held my life together, a guiding star, linchpin, all those words, those metaphors that I can use
Mm-hmm.
as someone who,
Mm-hmm.
and frankly, if I play back far enough, quite beyond expectation, I thought he was going to just lambast me and punish me or whatever, but he didn't. He encouraged me to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
and to probe and to think and to
Mm-hmm.
wonder and
Mm-hmm.
maybe also to doubt.
And what did your mother and father think of
Oh,
that?
they were mortified.
Yeah, yeah,
They were, and I was spanked. I was
yeah,
punished.
yeah,
Yes, they believed in corporal punishment.
yeah. Well, that was what it was in those days. Um, and did you ever serve on the altar and whatnot?
Yeah, I served as an acolyte under Father Walker. I sang, my brother and I sang in the choir
Of
as we
course.
were growing up. As a matter of fact, I can remember one particular Sunday, he sang alto, I sang soprano, and we did a duet of Panis Angelicus. And Rosalind Ball, Dr. Ball, was our organist choir master, and she was quite the musician. And so
Yeah.
we were tutored under her mentorship. And my mother was also, as a matter of fact, before my mother joined All Saints, she was even at the age of 15,
Mm-hmm.
was the choir director and musician at First Baptist Church, St. Louis.
And was that a flagship congregation?
It was at that time
Yeah.
on the corner of Cardinal and Bell Avenues in St. Louis. And we used to go there. My brother and I would go there
Mhm.
at least once a month
Yeah,
with
sure.
my grandmother.
Yeah. Oh, I know
And I
her.
used to always ask my mother when I came home, I said, "Mom, how come when we go to grandma's church, everybody looks like they're happy to be there and they want to stay? But when they go to our church, they always look like they're ready to leave."
And see, now I know why they were horrified.
She never answered my
Of
question.
course you didn't. Now, when did you know that when did the tugs first begin? That's my term, and not probably may not be yours.
Mhm.
When did you begin to surmise that you might have a call at some point in your life?
Uh, it, it happened in large measure my sophomore year at college. So that would make it 1972
At Westminster.
at Westminster. I
Hmm.
can remember clearly
Hmm.
looking at the world. And I look at as a matter of fact, I was just had a conversation this morning with Mitchell Felton, and
Oh,
among other things.
I know Mitchell.
Oh yeah, oh I know you do. When we talked earlier, yes, yes.
Hmm.
And he asked me how I was, and I said I'm in one of those places where I just lament the state of the world. I look around and
Yeah.
I see apartheid in the Middle East. I see genocide. I see hatred. I see malice. I see injustice. I see Trump. I just this is one of those days, and plus it's rainy and overcast here. It's not a great day. It's not a great day, and I felt that way in my sophomore year. And the Nichols character in Archibald MacLeish's J.B., a
Yes.
play in verse,
Yes.
had a line that I adopted as my mantra, that if God is God, he is not good. And if God is good, he is not God. If God is all powerful, God must not be good, because look at the world. And if God is good, benevolent, willing the best for this creation he has made, then God cannot be all powerful enough to bring it about. And that was my mantra. And at that time, the Reverend Dr.
You were
Bill,
flirting with doubt.
oh, flirting, cavorting, gambling in
Yeah.
the fields with,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes. And uh, now for what the chaplain at Westminster at the time, and for whatever reason, his name just went right out of my head. And I know him very well.
Well, I know why it went out of your head, but it'll come to you at 2 o'clock in the morning.
So he invited me to
Yeah.
come to his office every Friday
Yeah.
for a semester
Uh-huh.
for 1 hour
Uh-huh.
and do with that 1 hour with him whatever I wanted. I could
Okay.
talk, pray, be silent, cry, curse, whatever. And at the end of that time, he said, Paul, have you ever thought about ordained ministry? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, I want you to think about it and I want you to pray about it. And so for 2 years, I thought and prayed about it, pretty much did nothing else because I had gone to college as a political science major. I had planned to go to law school.
Yeah.
And I can remember in the spring of 1974, uh, with a few weeks and months left in the semester before I graduated,
And a
I
few
had law,
weeks
I
and
had
months left for Richard Nixon, but go ahead.
Yes, I
Yeah.
had law school applications on one side of my desk and
Mhm.
seminary applications on the Reverend Dr. William Huntley. I just remembered.
Mhm.
I had uh, seminary applications on the other side of my desk, and I quit trying to wrestle with the decision. And I just decided that I would fill them all out, and whoever gave me the most money, that's where I'd go. And the very day I decided that, that night I had a dream. And in the dream, I was standing at the precipice of a hill. And in the dream, it was an out of body experience because I was standing behind myself, looking at myself standing at the precipice of a hill. The horizon was cloud, filled with cloud. And out of the cloud came this voice, you shall go to seminary. And when I woke up the next morning, I felt liberated and freed for the first time in weeks and months.
Ooh.
I thought perhaps, yeah, it could be my subconscious talking to me. However, in all those weeks and months of wrestling and thinking and praying about it, I had come to no resolution. So I believed that the voice was the voice of God. And of course, I also knew that in scriptures, God speaks through dreams and God speaks out of clouds. And so I took that as the voice of God. And one of the things over all these years that has confirmed that for me is I've never regretted following this call. Never. Yes. Have I ever wished I had more money? Yes. But have I ever regretted the call and following call? No.
You know, one of my dear friends, now gone, whose name you would know, Vernon Jordan.
Yes.
Vernon and I were very, very good friends. And I spent a lot of time with him. We used to talk about Episcopalians terribly. I told him one time, I said, now, Vernon, if you want to get a dose of the Holy Spirit, you have to come down to St. John's Lafayette Square. And he said, He said, the Holy Spirit knock on the door and y'all don't let him in. But he used to joke. He would preach on the last Sunday of the academic year at a Rankin Chapel service. And I would always go. And one of his anecdotes always was, when I graduated from college, I had two choices. One was to go to seminary, the other one was to go to law school. And over that summer, I realized I liked sin. So I went to law school. In any event, you have a more presentable answer to that question. What would you, and you see, I guess you just did describe that experience as a call. You know, and it almost sounds, you know, in some other time or time in your life, it might have been a conversion experience. No?
Oh, no, I would say that because my time with Dr. Huntley, I look back, and that was my first identified, to the extent that I can remember, crisis of faith.
Yeah.
Because I had been taught that God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and all of that.
Yeah.
And I believed it.
Yeah.
But I saw for myself no evidence that that was so.
And if it were so, God had a lot to answer for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And frankly, that period in my life also planted the seed of my current and now pretty much lifelong understanding that doubt and faith always go hand in hand. And if I doubt faithfully, if I doubt honestly, which is to say, lay it out there, it is more than likely I will be led to deeper faith.
You know, this morning, I was reading online, the New York Times, and another friend of mine, Stephen Carter, who's a lawyer and a member of the faculty at Yale, wrote a wonderful piece about freedom of speech on college campuses. And of course, I always submit some comments, and my own belief is that in the academy, we must foster the free flow, the unfettered flow of ideas, even if abhorrent, and let them be roughed up in the arena of ideas in the classroom. When I went to seminary in my systematics course, in a paper I wrote, I prefaced the sentence with the following: at the risk of being heretical, I got back with a stern rebuke from my professor. And in big red ink, she said, never be concerned about heresy in a seminary.
Oh, that's priceless. I thought you were going to go somewhere else.
I know. And I said, oh, I've been liberated. I've been liberated. And it was a moment for me, much like the moment that you have when you talk about faith and doubt.
Well, I have often shared with folk, I said, it is no accident that on the day in the year that we Christians proclaim the reason we exist, that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead by God Almighty through the power of the Spirit, what do we do in the Episcopal Church the next Sunday? We tell the story of doubting Thomas. Yes, we do. Now, if that doesn't say something to us about the unshakable connection between faith and doubt, I don't know what does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, when you were visiting with was it Reverend Huntley?
Yes, well, the Reverend Doctor, who in his 80s continues to teach now and for years at the University of the Redlands in California.
Wow. Did you see that as the precious time that it obviously was in your life?
Well, I tell you what, next to Father Nicholson,
Yeah.
Dr. Huntley was one of a handful of adults whom I believe now, certainly looking back, had no agenda for me other than I be what I'm supposed to be. You know, my parents had agenda, my grandfolks had agenda,
Sure.
my
Yeah.
everybody, school teachers had agenda, folk in
Yeah,
the
because
church had
people
an
were
agenda.
lining up to take credit for you.
Yes, indeed. They didn't have an agenda other than that I become who I was supposed to be. And so that was priceless time, uh, and precious time for me.
Sounds like grace to me.
Indeed, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And also and also mercy, because particularly when I was one of my crying, cursing jags, he would just listen to me,
Mm-hmm.
just let me go.
Mm-hmm. Did you go right to seminary after Westminster?
Yes, after graduating from Westminster, I went to General Theological Seminary and enrolled August of 1974.
How did you find it?
General was an interesting place. Um, an interesting place. In my time, as I think about it, there still was, I call it a quota. Only a handful of students of color
Mm-hmm.
would be enrolled at a given year.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, at any time, there perhaps were 10 of us,
Mm-hmm.
maybe,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
Mm-hmm.
It was also the time in the church when we were wrestling legislatively with women's ordination.
Sure.
And there were women students there. Yes, that's true. But at the time, they could not be ordained.
So they were not on an ordination track.
Correct. But they came with hopes. And some of them to this day, there's a Martha Blacklock who is in her 80s. She's one of my sheroes.
Mm-hmm.
I also was at General during the time that who passed through the close? Paulie Murray.
Oh, wow.
And she, talk about she was somebody.
She
I
was.
can remember having an argument with Paulie Murray
Mm-hmm.
because there was a time where the women students were meeting and the black students were meeting at
Mm-hmm.
the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember saying to Paulie Murray, Paulie, and she chose to go meet with the women students.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, in a word, we're black, we're here, but women students can't be ordained. And so that is an act of the diminution of freedom that I must stand for at this time. And I said to Paulie, I said, Paulie, and at the end of the day, they still gonna call you a nigger. And
And
she
she
said,
said,
nevertheless, I must go.
she didn't argue with you.
Oh no, she did. Well, she had made her argument in
Yeah.
terms of where there is a freedom that is not yet had.
Yes.
That's where she must stand.
Woo! I love that story. Well, I mean, let me give you a quick aside. I know this is a wonderful conversation. I hope you think so too.
I do.
Paulie Murray, um, Sherlin Eiffel, some months ago, maybe a year ago now, wrote a piece in the New York Times about describing Thurgood Marshall as the most consequential lawyer of the 20th century.
Hmm.
And I said, well, yeah, he's up there, obviously. I just don't know who I'm leaving out. Um, so a few days later, I was on the campus of Howard's Law School because they were renaming the law library in Vernon's memory. So I spoke to the dean and I said, now, Sherlin Eiffel wrote that Thurgood Marshall was the most consequential lawyer. She said, well, yeah. She said, what do you think? And I said, I would put him up there, but I don't know who I'm leaving out. And she said, well, who would you put there? And without hesitation, I said, Paulie Murray. Then she told me the story, because Paulie Ruth Bader Ginsburg put her name on the brief because she relied on her research. Spotswood Robinson, my Richmond, St. Philip's co-communicant, who also used to date my aunt, who was a slut. But when he taught her at Howard, she made the argument separate could never be equal, and the men in the class laughed at her. Spotswood Robinson didn't. He put that argument in the brief. It was one of the winning arguments. So she said, let me tell you a story. She said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg came here to speak to the students. You know, when you go to the Howard Law School, there's that corridor where they have all headshots of all the luminaries. Ruth Bader Ginsburg walked through that corridor. She looked up. She said, where's Paulie? The dean said, she's not here. She said, I wanted to be here her up there the next time I come here.
Wow.
Paulie Murray grows in repute over time, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. And in nearly every area of which one might think.
That's
right. And surely law and theology, surely.
And you were blessed greatly.
Yes.
By having known her.
Oh, well, she was, like, as I refer to my mother-in-law, Ponthiola's mother, in greater glory now, I also say about Paulie, some people are forces of nature. Some people are nature. I mean, Paulie was nature.
Was nature. What a remarkable woman and story. And there was such a thing as field education work when you were in seminary?
Yes.
Where did you do yours?
St. Luke's, Montclair, and the rector was Herb Donovan.
Really? Huh. And how did you find that?
Oh, Herb was welcoming and most gracious. And as a matter of fact, there were two seminarians from General who served field ed there. The other was James Kelsey, who became the bishop of, I'm trying to think which diocese in Michigan was he the bishop. And tragically, coming back from a call, a visit, an Episcopal visitation, he was killed in a car accident some years ago. Yes. But Herb Donovan was most gracious and welcoming. As a matter of fact, I was taken in by the family, his wife Mary, and his two daughters and son, his son, whom we called Mike back in the day, but Herbert. We're still connected on social media.
How wonderful. Now, after seminary, you went back to your home diocese. Yes?
Yes. I had wanted to go to Southern Ohio because I had a chance there to serve in a congregation under the episcopate of Herb. But my bishop, William Augustus Jones Jr., wouldn't hear of it because he said, no, you got to come back to the Diocese of Missouri.
How long did you stay back in the Diocese of Missouri?
2 years.
2 years.
I was a curate at Calvary Episcopal Church, Columbia, Missouri. At that time, the rector was David Haig, who later became the rector of St. Peter's, Morristown, New Jersey, and then later on the National Church staff.
St. Peter's, Morristown, wonderful church. Jennifer Baskerville Burroughs served there for a while.
Yes, I do know that.
Yeah. Now, 2 years, and then Chicago?
And then I was in Chicago for 3 years at a merged congregation, Church of the Messiah. And that was the physical plant we occupied on the south side of Chicago, 8255 South Dante. And Messiah, St. Bartholomew, that was in the Englewood neighborhood, a massive physical plant. The congregation had so dwindled it could no longer support it. So Bishops Montgomery and Primo.
Primo.
Yes, merged those two congregations, and I became the first rector.
So you were rector at your second place.
Correct.
Yeah. Was that
As a matter of
unusual
fact,
at the time?
one of the folk who succeeded me over time was
Yeah.
Daryl James.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Was that unusual at the time
Was what on you?
to be a rector so soon? My
I don't.
question is, let me ask the real question.
Okay.
Were you a star?
Was I a star?
Yes,
I
sir.
don't think so. I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I mean, to this day, uh, there there are myriad things I do not do well. Myriad, myriad, manifold. Um, I wouldn't call myself a star. No, no.
Did you enjoy being rector in Chicago?
You know, I did. The congregation, there were clearly in whatever the vocation, whatever the job, there are things you like, there are things you don't like.
Sure.
And frankly, most people, it seems to me, at the end of working life, if you ask them, did you enjoy what you did? Most of them who say yes spent most of their time doing things they enjoy.
Yeah.
And those who say no spent most of their time doing things they didn't enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah.
The congregation was small enough that every year I visited every household.
Oh my goodness. How
And
wonderful.
so for 3 years, I visited every household. And that was wonderful.
And well, those years, it must have been the end of the 70s, early 80s.
Well, it was 1979 to 1982.
Yeah. Around the transition to Ronald Reagan.
Yes,
Right. And the ascendancy of the Republican hegemony.
yes, yes.
Did you know Raymond Mitchell by any chance?
Of St. Edmunds?
Yes.
Raymond Scott Mitchell?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
You know, he was my rector
Oh, really?
in Richmond, at St.
Raymond,
Philip's in Richmond, before
Raymond
St. Edmund.
was priceless.
Oh, you think?
Oh no, yes, indeed. As a matter of fact, he was, you know, I had the privilege throughout. I can remember when I was at seminary,
Mhm.
Fred Williams took all the Black seminarians under his wing,
Mhm.
and introduced us to life in not only New York, but for example, the West Indian culture.
Yeah.
He introduced us to Wyatt T. Walker.
Oh,
He would have us up at his place for evenings of conversation and engagement. He also would, the point was to take us out of the seminary atmosphere where we could relax and be ourselves.
yeah.
And so Raymond Mitchell, when I was in Chicago, was a mentor for us as well.
Oh,
And
how wonderful.
he would invite us to dinners and
Mhm.
regale us the times that on snowy, cold, icy Chicago days on Sundays, how he would and the organist couldn't get there. He'd play at the organ and then go to the altar and then go to the he was, yes.
You know, he could wail on that organ.
Yes, he could. Well, and he demonstrated that
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, often I would have to run over to the church on my mother's behalf, and he would be at the organ when the church was empty, which was always a delight. Um, how did you get to Charleston?
Um, Jim Donald was a fellow classmate at General, was the canon to the ordinary for C. Fitzsimmons Allison, Bishop of South Carolina. And there was an opening at Calvary Church in Charleston, and Jim asked, would I be interested? And so that's how I got to Charleston.
Where's Calvary? Is that a Black church?
Yes, 106 Line Street, at the very northern end of the peninsula of the city of Charleston.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Right back in the day where the Crosstown Expressway connected the Ashley River and the Cooper River, east
Yeah.
and west of the peninsula.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to talk to you about Charleston, but about South Carolina, actually, but I'll get back to that. Now, when did you meet Pontiola?
In South Carolina.
Uh-huh.
I had been married first in Chicago, and My first wife, Judith, and I had a child, Kristen,
Uh-huh.
and then we were divorced because when we went to Charleston, she took Kristen and went back to Chicago shortly
Oh, well.
thereafter. Uh, and so Panthiola and I met in 1987 in May. She was the news director of an FM radio station in Charleston. And the then mayor for life, Joe Riley, had invited me to come do the invocation and benediction at an annual event called the Charleston East Side Tour of Homes, where the city would renovate a property and then do a lottery to help rebuild the East Side. And Panthiola was there covering the event for the news, and that's where we met.
Pontiola A. Divine.
I'm sorry?
Pontiola A. Divine. What was her last name?
Oh, Mac.
Mac. Yeah.
Mac. Panthiola Mac.
Yes. And was she Episcopalian at the time?
No. She came out of the Church of God, Anderson,
Ah.
Indiana, but the Church of God.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, she will say, and she has said many times, that she would go from church to church to get her soul needs met and fed. So she would go AME, Baptist, I mean, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
You could see her anywhere and everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Good for her. Um, we'll talk about South Carolina in a minute. You know, one time I was doing a rector search for St. Luke's in D.C.
Uh-huh.
And I went to hear a sermon of a minister whose name please don't ask me to recall it, I can't. Who was it St. Mark's in Charleston?
Mm-hmm.
The church with the wonderful tongue and groove woodwork all over
Mm-hmm.
the nave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was the most beautiful church, I think, one of the most beautiful churches I've ever been in.
Yeah, well, there was in my time in South Carolina, it was often said that St. Mark's was the black church for the fair-skinned black folk, and Calvary was the black church for the dark-skinned black folk.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read between the lines and say field hands and house folk.
Mm-hmm. And I think, no, it was about Savannah that I read one time in that book, that there was a fine tooth comb over the doorway, and if your hair couldn't go through the fine
They
tooth
said that
comb,
about St. Mark's.
yeah, I bet you that's true.
And they also said that if they also had a panel, a tan painted panel, and if you were darker than that panel, then you couldn't enter.
Go on right back home. Well, that's I mean, that's what we have done to ourselves, right?
Yes, indeed.
Did you enjoy South Carolina?
Well, yeah, I met Panthiola.
Yeah. And you know what else? You knew
Yes.
Joe Riley,
Yes. Oh, yes.
who was a very fine man.
Yes, he was indeed. He was indeed.
Yeah. Does the name Ed Ball mean anything to you?
Ed?
Ball, who wrote Slaves in the Family.
No.
This is a man from South Carolina, from Charleston, actually, who wrote the book Slaves in the Family. His family, during antebellum times, owned many plantations, and he went back and found the descendants of the persons who had been enslaved on those plantations.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what then. But deep in the book, he writes about the fact that his father became an Episcopal priest and went to Virginia Theological Seminary.
Oh.
Yeah. So can we get to DC?
Sure.
Were
so
you
after 6 years in Charleston, I ended up at Trinity Church, DC. My immediate successor, because he's more important than I am, is John Harmon.
John, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. How did St. Mark's happen?
Who who knows, the Holy Ghost of God. I can remember and I say we because at that time Pontiola and I had developed this sense that if I were to be called somewhere, it would be because we both were involved in the process. The move from Calvary Church Charleston to Trinity Church DC happened without her participation. We also think because the vestry just didn't want to spend the money, or frankly didn't consider that important. And frankly, I was too stupid to realize that that's really what was being said without it being said. And I would, yeah, I wish I had been more, not even more forthright, but even before being more forthright, I wish I had been more alert, more aware, more conscious of processes and what was being said without it being said. In any case, Bishop Haynes, Ronald Haywood Haynes, following the rectorship of James Rowe Adams, under which St. Mark's really was a diocesan outlier. A healthy, wealthy, resource-laden congregation, but Jim had very little use for institutional structures, very little use for the diocese, very little use for the bishop. I mean, for example, they would do, the folk at St. Mark's would do things like come to diocesan convention. And while everybody was around having dinner provided by the diocese, they would bring their own food. And it was better than anything the diocese ever thought about serving. But that was just a very small actual / symbolic expression of their distancing from life in the diocese. And frankly, St. Mark's had been and was really a resource-laden congregation, which, truth to tell, in terms of material substance, didn't need anybody else.
Yeah.
And Jim Adams functioned that way.
Yeah.
And so Ron Haynes wanted someone who had a sense of the diocesan connectivity. And I had been in the diocese for 10 years at Trinity and clearly was a participant in the life of the
10 years
diocese.
you were at Trinity.
Yeah, from 1988 to 98.
Wow. Okay.
And so he recommended that I consider it. And I can remember Bill Flanders, a priest and an adjunct professor, adjunct member of at St. Mark's, was on the search committee and sent word that, well, if you're going to jump in, you better jump in because we're about to close off receiving names. And so I did. And one of the people who also turned out to be one of the 4 finalists was a woman by the name, her name is now Susan Flanders, she and Bill later married, Susan Gressinger at the time, who had been the associate rector.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So
and I will also say that when the search committee, the 3 members of the search committee came to Trinity to visit us, Pontiola, in her typical way, and I tell you what, every once in a while, I kind of think I may have something to say or something to do, but truth to tell, my light is dull when I stand next to her. I say to her all the time, I said, I could put on a tuxedo and stand next to you and I still look like a bum. But in any case, she said to the search committee, in effect, how did you put it, honey? I'm trying to remember. Oh, I'm not sure this is a good fit. Well, I was ready to fall through the floor at that point. But she was right, spot on. Not sure this is a good fit. Nevertheless, we got called to St. Mark's. And although my first day was June the 1st, 1998, we were invited to come to the annual parish meeting at St. Mark's in April. We walked in the door to a packed nave.
Ooh.
And we were introduced as the rector and the new rector and his wife. There was some applause. There was some expression of surprise. and there was some expression of shock. The vestry had not bothered to tell the community that the new rector was Black. I think, to the extent that I can be favorable about that omission, it was because they believed St. Mark's was progressive enough that they didn't need to do that. However, that in and of itself is an act of racism.
Of course it was.
And I think we spoke, when we spoke earlier, I said this, and if I didn't, I should have, because it's a part of my story. I would not, and this is the proverbial word, I would not trade and give those first 3 years to my worst enemy. It was very difficult.
Well, that I was not aware of, but I do recall in my research on you the reaction of the congregation or the people assembled for the annual meeting to your appearance, meaning your presence and also your appearance. My goodness, talk to me about those first 3 years.
One of the things that came out, or one of the revelations that came out, was the racism of any number of people who were open enough to confess it. I can recall the first parish weekend. St. Mark's had a tradition of going to the Shrinemont Camp and Conference Center every summer for a weekend of a parish retreat. And you would have anywhere from 100 to 150 or more people go on this retreat.
Yeah.
And I can remember one Saturday evening, all of us in the large gathering room, a member of the parish got up and said that he had to learn to retool his hearing because he was not accustomed to erudition coming from a Black voice. Now,
what reaction did that get? You could hear a pin drop, or did you hear?
Oh, yes, you could, as the old saying, you could hear a mouse pissing on cotton.
Yeah.
But yes, you could hear a pin drop. For me, it was utterly humiliating. And at the same time, the man who said it was weeping. And this was his confession of his racism. And so we had, that very week after, we had a gathering over lunch to talk. Now, I digress to say, every time there was a public dressing down, and there were a number of them, the reconciliations were always private.
How did you feel about his tears?
In my best self, I consider my best self, my most gracious self, I accepted that as his confession and his honesty. But again, it was humiliating.
But why would you feel humiliated by that?
Because here was someone saying to me that the subtext for me is you couldn't possibly be erudite. You couldn't possibly be learned. You couldn't possibly be intelligent.
Right.
So are you cribbing from someone else?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the subtext for me.
It didn't make you angry.
No, I was more hurt. I was more hurt than angry. And for me, frankly, in my life to this day, I'm hurt first. I will later get angry, but I'm hurt first.
That probably has saved you a great deal of woe.
Perhaps so. I mean, it used to be in my own personal development, I would be angry a great deal, and it took me a long time growing up to figure out that I had been hurt. That's why I was angry. So once I made that connection, then I could sit with the hurt. However, having said that, once I got to anger, it lasted a long time. Because forgiveness, it wasn't an arrow in my quiver.
Yeah. Forgiveness is hard.
Yes, it is. And for example, I mean, another example, I mean, these come back to
But
me. I
it's
mean,
it's essential for the forgiver.
oh, yes. I can remember there was a tradition at St. Mark's, whether they still practice it, I don't know, at baptism, shutting the devil's door. Apparently, Jim Adams brought this back from Ireland or some damn place. And the notion is that this is a physical act, a symbolic act of what the community would seek to do to keep evil from the children, the baptized. And no one at the first baptism at which I was to officiate, no one told me about shutting the devil's door. And before the service, I had 3 people come to me in the sacristy telling me about who's shutting the devil's door. And I remember the first person who asked, I said, well, what is that? And the person told me. And then the next person asked, and I said, okay, what is that? And that person told me. And the third person, and I said, what is that? I got 3 different answers. And so I said, given the fact that it seems to me we're not clear, no one is shutting the devil's door. We're not doing it. The next day, the next day, on the parish email, I was accused of being ignorant and insensitive to parish traditions.
Well, my sinful way, listening to this story, was that, I wonder who I would have picked to throw out the door and let the devil's door hit him in the rear end. But you see, your priest pray for me. But really,
Yes.
did you ultimately adopt shutting the devil's door into the liturgy?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we did it. And I reframed it in terms of what it was and why we did it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it had been a custom and tradition of the parish for years. And so once I figured out what it was, I said, let me put this in my language. And so when we do this, we'll say this is why we're doing it.
What have been some of the greatest challenges for you as a priest in the Episcopal Church, or generally as a priest or a man of God or one of the disciples?
One of the, frankly, the greatest challenges is, although throughout I have participated in diocesan life, one of the greatest challenges is seeking to make strong connections between whatever parish I was serving and the diocese, and to seek to teach that when we say diocese, we're not talking about the bishop and the staff, which is what most people tend to mean when they say that. I said, we're talking about a diocesan family. We have a larger community of brothers and sisters with whom we are connected and for whom we care. And our individual living, in terms of the fact that we're a congregation that is vibrant, is meant to strengthen the whole. I mean, that's really pretty much why we exist. So that's been a challenge because generally speaking, you get this pushback that the diocese is the administrative structure. Well, no, it isn't. And I particularly don't like it when bishops I perceive to be capricious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And frankly, one of the great losses for Panthiola and me was when we arrived in Washington, D.C. in September of 1998. No, 1988. That meant that we had only 1 year under the episcopate of John Thomas Walker.
That's right.
And I can remember he called me to his office. And he said to me, he said, Paul, I've had people say to me, Paul's not involved in the diocese. And I would say, well, Bishop, I just haven't figured out what my niche is or where I need to be. He says, well, I really want you to think about it because I just feel terrible that people are keeping you out of diocesan life. And I just want you to think and pray on this and find your place. And trust me, you will be welcome. And as I was driving home, I said, this man in his gentle, kindly way, has just thrashed me all around his office and said, boy, you better find something to do and find it soon. But it was his way. He was just a lovely, gracious man and wise. And God knows, the more I knew of his history in the church, what he endured, Lord have mercy.
You know, someone not long ago, I'm looking at the time, but it sent me for our John Thomas Walker collection a letter, a handwritten letter, dated April 1945. When he was in the military, and the letter was to a friend of his, a white guy who had become a doctor, who ultimately became a doctor. The letter was found among his papers by this doctor's son. And he called me up and he said, I understand that you guys have the John Thomas Walker collection. Well, this is a letter that he wrote to my dad, and they were fast friends. My father always said that John Thomas Walker was one of his great influences.
Oh, okay.
And there was first of all, his penmanship was flawless. And he spoke about what joy there would be when peace came, because he knew it was at hand. I read it carefully, and then of course he talked about going to Brooklyn to see his girlfriend. But I called Maria Walker and I told her we had the letter. And I also said, but there's also reference to the girlfriend in Brooklyn. She said, yeah, but that wasn't me. Isn't that a wonderful story? But no, John Thomas Walker, I think, you know, in like I mentioned, I think, and you and I agreed on Paulie Murray, who grows in, you know, larger in death than he existed in life. I think that is true not only for Paulie Murray, but it's also true for John Thomas Walker. Yeah. What the joys of your life in the church, the joys of being a person who preaches the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ?
Well, the principal joy of my life is preaching. I love to preach. I love to preach. And I have channeled from the very first time I opened my mouth in the very first sermon I ever preached at All Saints Episcopal Church in August of 1975. The summer following my first year in seminary, this voice came out, and it took me a while to figure it out. I don't remember when I did, but I realized I was channeling what I had heard at First Baptist Church in St. Louis.
Wow, my goodness.
That I could not remember what I had heard, but I remembered the passion with which it was expressed, and that is the way I have preached.
At the corner of?
Oh, Cardinal and Bell Avenues in St. Louis, yes. And I absolutely love to preach. The other joy in my life in the church is that in now almost 50 years ordained, I have become a mentor to younger folk. And I rejoice, like Mitchell is one of them, and I rejoice to watch and listen to them. And matter of fact, we were talking today because he was asking my consul on something. I mean, really, you really think I got something to tell you? That's a joy to me. I mean, that matters to me very much, greatly. And now I serve as the assistant to the rector. He said, no, you're the associate. I said, no, that would be a full-time position. I'm the assistant to the rector here at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And Father Rob Brown, on occasion, on more than one, will turn to me and say, well, Paul, this is the issue. Well, what do you think? Because you got more years. There's nothing you haven't seen and all this kind of stuff. And I'll tell him. And then he'll say, well, what should we do? And I will say, RYTR. And the first time I said it, he just looked at me, what does that mean? I said, Rob, you the rector. I don't have to decide anything. You direct. And the other thing I have discovered is as opinionated as I am, and I can take instruction. I mean, fine,
Yeah.
happy to serve.
How's your prayer life?
My prayer life, I tell you what, it remains and it continues to grow, because one of the manifestations of my prayer life is my blogging life. And most of the things about which I blog are things related to are things related to God, church, theology, suffering, pain, war. I mean, you name it. Yeah, and poetry, frankly, as
Yeah.
well.
Whose poetry are you reading most these days? What poetry is speaking to you?
Oh, one of my all-time favorites, R.S. Thomas.
Oh.
As a matter of fact, he probably, along with Langston Hughes
Mm-hmm.
and T.S. Eliot, um, I would say R.S. Thomas is probably my favorite poet, because his coming out of his Welshness, his austere
Mm-hmm.
look at the world is clarifying for me.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't dressy, it is poignant, it is passionate, and it's on point.
No, Emily Dickinson.
Some, but I mean, is she my fave? No,
No,
I
no,
can't.
no, 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 I'm not going to put you on that. I'm not going to say that. I'm just being. It just you and I enjoy some of the same poets. You know, T.S. Eliot, and I'm an Auden fan,
Ah, yes.
uh, and um, um, and a Milton fan. But when there are those times that I really find that I need my Dickinson fix.
I understand. I
And I've
understand.
discovered Rita Dove.
Oh, yes. And
And I would recommend, taking a look at Rita Dove.
okay. Okay. Because she was poet laureate for.
Yeah, she was. She was. But it's what surprised me was, I was a little dismissive, actually. Some latter day, modern young woman, who doesn't know much about life, blah, 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 blah.
Well,
Wrong.
have you
I was
have
wrong,
you
wrong, wrong.
have you tapped into someone of whom only recently I have heard of, Cole Riley Austin, or Austin Riley?
No.
Um, Her latest book is Black Liturgies, and she's a New York Times bestseller. Young
I
black
hate
woman.
not knowing this. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, young black woman. Cole Riley. No, Cole Austin Riley. Her last name is Austin Riley. Austin. And the person who shared Cole with me is, and my wife is reminding me, because she knows I'm addle-brained, I forget stuff. Uh, a woman by the name of Cameron Wiggins Bellum, Bellm. She has a doctorate in Russian literature, yet she has, for the time, forsaken the world of academe to dwell in spirituality, Christian spirituality. She is Roman Catholic. She lives with her husband and two boys up in the upper Northwest. And I came by her um, online somehow, and we have gotten connected now over the course of years. And she is an inspiration to me, a young woman in her late 30s, early 40s.
Hmm.
And Cole who are these people? Oh,
Yeah. Isn't it wonderful?
it is. It
Isn't it
is.
wonderful?
It is.
Um, You talked earlier about Kristen, your daughter.
Yes.
Are there others?
No, no, she is our daughter. We have often spoken of her as our daughter by my first marriage,
Yeah.
and she has referred to Panthiola as mom for years and years and years, and the two of them are very bonded.
And where's Kristen now?
Kristen is in Baltimore.
Oh,
She has worked for 14 years or so for the Department of Agriculture,
okay.
and she has moved all over the place. She's been in Baltimore maybe the last 2 or 3 years, and she still works for Ag.
Does she like it?
Apparently,
Baltimore, Baltimore.
oh yes, she does. She has a townhouse or a row house in Pigtown.
Oh,
Mhm.
good for her.
Yeah. Oh, and yes, and she is a piece of work.
Well, I guess the fruit doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Oh no, no, we love her. She's something.
All right, Paul, we're going to wind down a little bit now. Let me ask you this question. Is there something that you anticipated talking about in this conversation that we have not explored? And if there is, would you please talk about that now?
Okay. Well, no, actually, this has been wonderful. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, what I had anticipated, and particularly when you reinforced it, I don't mean that bad way. I mean, you just reiterated by saying, "Well, I'll ask the questions," and go. I thought this would just simply be a Q&A, but this has been a conversation, which
Been a
I
conversation.
love.
Yeah,
This is grand. I'm
yeah,
fine.
yeah. This
I'm
is what I
fine.
love. This is what I love. I can't tell you. One of my friends is I don't know if you know Juliana Richardson from the History Makers.
Well, I know the name, yes.
Yeah, and she and I speak all the time because um we talk about because I pay attention to her capacity to have these kinds of conversations to get people's stories. And I pay attention because I admire greatly the way she does it.
Mhm.
And the one thing that my father always taught me was that give people an opportunity to talk about themselves so that you can get to know them better.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Mhm.
Agreed. Well, let me back up and actually, when you said that, it triggered something that matters to me. When I talk about Saint Mark's and the difficulties, there were clearly some key learnings that I have taken with me, and I abide by them. I can honestly say I learned that, and in learning it, I practice it. One of the and what you just said triggered one of those learnings is that we humans are always talking about ourselves.
Mhm.
That if I say to you, Riley, I think what you just said is brilliant. Now, it may well be. However, I'm saying something to you
Mhm.
about me, how I perceive things, when and how and what I perceive. So we're always talking about ourselves. And where I learned that at St. Mark's, there's this tradition of sermon seminar where the preacher preaches and then people come to microphones and share things that got stirred up in their thinking and feeling as they listened. Uh, two big takeaways. I'll never forget the time a member of the congregation got up and said, Paul, that's the worst sermon I ever heard. And I had the presence of mind. I mean, because I don't always give myself credit for having a presence of mind, but I had the presence of mind to say, I said, well, Bill, why was it the worst sermon you ever heard? And he ticked off 5 reasons very quickly. And I said, well, now you have put it into the air. Thank you. And I realized he was talking about himself. He really, yes, he was aiming it at me, but he was talking about himself. And that taught me that. The other thing was that I much prefer, and sometimes people would annoy me. I said, "You mean I preached this sermon and that's what you got out of it? How did you pick up on that and run with that?" But that also taught me that folks of goodwill will come to a sermon and bring their fullest selves in terms of the things that they deal with, what delights them, what scares them, what fears, what joys they have, and out of that, or what they're dealing with that particular day, and out of that they respond. And how much greater for me was that than somebody coming to the door and said, "Paul, that was a great sermon." What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
When you say that, um, it reminds me of a great work of art.
Mhm.
No matter what you say or what you have written, once you do that, once you write it and say it, you lose control over it. It
True.
takes on a life of its own.
Indeed.
It exists, and people will bring to it what they walk in with and will
Absolutely.
hear what you never, ever intended.
That's why a wise person, I can't remember who said it, this is one of those phrases or observations that has many parents, that the best sermon I ever preached is the one you heard.
I like
It
that.
wasn't what I preached, it's
Yeah,
what you heard.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One more question about St. Mark's. Your reputation from St. Mark's is legendary.
Really?
Yeah. Um,
Did you know that, honey? My reputation was.
well, it always had, and I listen to people like Weston, I adore Weston, by the way.
Oh, yes.
And
And to this day, I will never forget.
mhm.
He preached one Sunday on Psalm 88 and talked about the vagaries of mental illness. It's one of the most powerful sermons I have ever heard. And St. Mark's was a voluble community, my God, filled with type A people that talked all the time. It was silent in that nave. And yes, Lord have mercy. I love Weston. I just think he's incredible. He's one of those people I'm going to be like if ever I choose to grow up. Oh yeah.
Well, I just remember, of course, he's from, he was in Richmond, and I'm seeing a picture of him sitting down the middle, squat down the middle of the road, as Fritz Hollings used to say, you're a South Carolina senator, squat down in the middle of the road. And there was Weston squat down the middle of the road, getting picked up by the gendarme to
Yes.
be taken off to the pokey.
Yes.
I said, Weston, get out of that street. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, boy. You don't need to be down in that street.
He's something.
One of his parishioners and I serve on a board together. I serve on the National Archives Board, which I love. And one of the members of the board is Jackie Mars. And one day I said to her, and she's a member of Grace the Plain.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Jackie, you and I have a mutual friend. And she said, oh, who's that? And I said, Weston Matthews. She said, I adore Weston. Just like that. I adore Weston. And so I picked up the phone and I called Weston and I said, FaceTime right now. But what I mean by that is that it always, and I don't want, I hope you're not offended when I use the term yeasty.
Mm-hmm.
It was always alive. St. Mark's always had the reputation while you were there of being alive.
It was that.
Yeah.
Some days it was too alive.
Well, but I don't know what that means, unless I experience it, of course.
Well. One of the things I say about St. Mark's is that it is the only place I've ever served where folks generally couldn't take yes for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Riley, I want to do this at this time with these people.
Mhm.
And you would say, well, Paul, that's an interesting idea, but I tell you what, we've got some other initiatives going. If you could just wait maybe 6 months, and maybe there are a couple of other people I would recommend you that, Riley, you didn't hear me. I want to do this at this time with these people. I mean, the other thing was the definition at St. Mark's for a leader is anybody who could dream of something and then initiate it. And that was everybody. And I mean,
Woo!
sometimes folk would go off and I wouldn't hear about it for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and something had been set in motion. I said, oh my God, really? So,
Well,
so it was alive. It was alive.
this is how we began the conversation today. People who dream and people who make it happen.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, indeed.
And that's how we began the conversation.
That's right.
I hope that you love living in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
We do. What we do. And Panfiola and I sought to discern where we would retire. Of course, she had other ideas. And I have no family in Missouri, and I had no desire to go back to the Midwest. And we had met in South Carolina, and at the time her mother was alive, and so that was a premium for us to be close.
Mm-hmm.
And we settled on upstate South Carolina, which was a part of her original beat when she graduated from USC and worked for NPR.
Yeah.
Upstate South Carolina was her region.
Wow.
And so she knew it well. And so this is where we settled. And we love Spartanburg.
Mm-hmm. I have friends from Orangeburg.
Mm-hmm.
My friend Ralph Everett, who used to work for Fritz Hollings. But Ralph Everett's father was the pastor of Mount Pisgah Baptist Church in Orangeburg.
Wow.
And he's a typical preacher's kid, just wild, looking like he's going to bust loose in any second. A wonderful man. And a friend from Gallivant's Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, a slew of people in Charleston. And I remember one time spending some time at the Spoleto Festival.
Yes.
And was surprised at how white it was. But I was at a party one evening, and you probably know these people, but there was a black couple there, and the man was a doctor, his wife, professor or something like that. And we were in one of these old houses, and she said, "Isn't this the house that your great-grandfather worked on?" He said, "Yes." And she said, "I thought so." And she said, "Where's the signature?" He said, "It's under the staircase. Come with me." And I said, "Can I come too?" And I did. And right beneath that area under the staircase that has
yes.
a way, underneath the stair, there was his great-grandfather's signature.
Wow.
We were determined.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Indeed.
To be known.
Indeed.
We were here. We were here. Mm-hmm. Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you, Riley. Bless you, brother. Thank you.
You too. So you will be hearing from me very shortly.
Okay.
With all of this information. Oh, and I need those forms signed and sent back.
But I sent them back. I sent them back.
All right, I'll look again. I'll talk to my student assistant. See, listen to what I do. My student assistant. See how I just point the finger. Well, it was him. It wasn't me.
and let me know if you don't have them. Because
all right, but if you sent them, then we have them.
Okay. All right.
He's very good.
Okay.
Keeps me on.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bless you, brother. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.